at least one cigarette a day for at least 1 year. They notified 20 British hospitals, asking them to include their lung cancer patients. Hi friends, I'm Filip, a medical doctor and PhD student here in Croatia, and on this channel you can join me on my journey through medicine and science. Welcome to this new series of videos called Why Doctors Smoke. Since around 1912, doctors wondered whether smoking tobacco had any effect on developing lung cancer. In this video I will talk about two pairs of doctors, one pair in the UK, the other one in the US. They all wanted to find out why the number of lung cancer patients was increasing at an unexpected rate. Up to that point, there had been several studies, which were however small scale and inconclusive as to finding the cause of this rate increase. Naturally, this was an important problem. If the cause of this phenomenon was not found, then more and more people would get lung cancer and subsequently die from it. Whereas if a cause was identified, then these deaths could be at least delayed or potentially even completely prevented. So these doctors decided to conduct their own research to try and find the culprit behind this increased rate of lung cancers. The results of both of these studies were published on the same year, 1950. The UK doctors Dall and Hill noted that this increase in the number of lung cancer cases couldn't simply be attributed to, say, better diagnostics or a population which was naturally getting older and older. In fact, they concluded that there must be an environmental cause behind this. Now, at the time, there were two most prominent suspects for this phenomenon. One was the general atmospheric pollution from car exhaust fumes, industrial plants, coal mines, etc., and the other was smoking tobacco. So these two British doctors, Dall and Hill, set out to test this theory and to compare patients who had developed lung cancer to patients who didn't have lung cancer, and see if there were any differences between them with their exposure to environmental factors such as smoking tobacco or general atmospheric pollution. So what they did, they notified 20 British hospitals, asking them to include their lung cancer patients into this study. When the patients consented, for those that did, an interviewer was sent to the hospital and sat down with the patient and guided them through a questionnaire. The questionnaire primarily focused on the smoking habits, and all the patients filled out the exact same questionnaire. For comparison, patients who were at the same time at the same hospital but weren't treated for cancer but rather for some other disease were also taken into account and included in the study, and they were asked to fill out the same questionnaire. Of course, one important thing was to define what a smoker is, because as we know, smoking habits can vary greatly from year to year, from childhood to adolescence to adulthood. In this study, a smoker was defined as a person who smoked at least one cigarette a day for at least 1 year. One thing to keep in mind here is that in the 1950s, the vast majority of smokers were men. So data on women are much more scarce, and therefore the studies was primarily focused on men. Now, out of 649 men who had lung cancer, 647 of them smoked. That's 99.7%. For comparison, out of 649 men without cancer, who had some other disease due to which they were at the hospital, 622 of them smoked. We can see two things from these data. First of all, a lot of men smoked. And second of all, the proportion of those who smoked was greater in the lung cancer group. There's a statistical test which can tell us if this difference of a few percentages is actually significant, and in this case it was. This difference is even greater when we look at heavy smokers, which were defined as people who smoked 25 or more cigarettes per day. In the lung cancer group, 26% were heavy smokers, whereas in the non-cancer group, only 13.5% were heavy smokers. In other words, this indicated that the more someone smoked, the more likely it was that they would have lung cancer. This might seem obvious today, but at the time this study was performed, it was being discovered for the first time. Now, just because these two things happen at the same time, smoking and lung cancer, doesn't necessarily mean that one caused the other, which is something I also talk about in my vaccine video linked over here. For example, it could be the case that patients with lung cancer started smoking after they got the disease, or that a third factor caused both the lung cancer and the increased smoking. Although intuitively, these scenarios are highly unlikely, and in fact, the questionnaire took into account when in life patients started smoking, so we know for sure that they started smoking first, and then they developed the lung cancer. Overall, the conclusion of this study was that smoking tobacco is an important factor in causing the lung cancer, although it cannot be said with absolute certainty that smoking tobacco was a direct or the only cause of lung cancer. That same year, a very similar study was done in the US by Wynder and Graham, who included 608 patients with lung cancer and 780 patients as a control group. Out of all the patients with lung cancer, 98.7% were smokers, compared to 85.4% in the group without lung cancer. The difference between heavy smokers was again much greater and seen in similar proportions as those in the British study. The conclusion of this US study was also that smoking is at least one important factor in the development of lung cancer. In summary, the results of both of these studies, as well as previous research on a smaller scale and without control groups, which was done by other scientists, all point in the same direction, that smoking is an important factor in the development of lung cancer, although from the current data, it couldn't be said with absolute certainty that it was a direct cause or the only cause of lung cancer. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see a doctor smoking a cigarette? Let me know in the comments below. The story about the research behind smoking continues in the next video in this series, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. I'll see you later.